Test, test, test. All right. So here's the link. Mute yourselves on Zoom, and I'll see you on YouTube. I'll email this to you too. Test, 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 test. Test, 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 test. If you are on YouTube, mute yourselves on Zoom. Very, very important. Because that shit is annoying for everybody. I can still hear myself, so whoever's got that, mute yourselves. Test, test, test. You guys can all hear me, right? Here, 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 here. Okie dokie. Oh, Jesus Christ. Hold on, let me get my drive. Fucking hell. So this is the work drive that I use. Small, efficient, USB-C. You can carry it in your pocket whenever you go to a session in a studio. Very convenient. I love that shit. So, what I'm going to show you is one way you're going to utilize the Elastic Audio, right? You're going to use it on the assignment called PT Timing Correction. So, let me go ahead and when you find the session, I'm going to make sure that I have the actual link. Bum, bum, bow. Yeah, cool. So, this is a G drive. I think they're called G drive they're called G drive. So I don't know if you can see, but it's like literally G drive. I like them. This is a different drive, but same company. For some reason, I've been using those for 6, 7, 8 years. I just seem to like them. I don't know why. They just seem to be reliable. They've never failed me. Like all the drives, even the ones I've had since like 2014, 15, they still work fine. I'm still able to access sessions from them. So I like them. And then of course I have I have work drives, but then they all back up to the big drive, the big G drive. Man, I should get a sponsorship from these guys. So, for the PT timing correction, you will download a session called Sharp Hand Joe. Right here, right? And when you unzip it, you will get this. And when you open it, you will get this. Well, not this exactly. You will get something about when you guys are here, this shit doesn't work well. There you go. This is what you guys will see, right? This is the session as it comes when you download it. What's up? What's up? All right. So the first thing I'm gonna do is trying to get back to the original session. I'm gonna delete all this shit. All right. So this is the session that you will download, right? And it sounds like a drum kit. Right? And it sounds like a drum kit that's been played kind of poorly. Now, for this assignment, this is very important. Do not use these three. The stereo, overheads. OH is overheads, right? OH mono is a mono microphone overhead, and a room stereo. Don't use any of these. You can mute all three of these, so don't use those. Just focus on the close microphone. So the toms, the hi-hat, kick, and snare. All right. And what you can do is, I'm literally going to do the assignment for you right now. You select the tom, select the kick, right? Or rather, let me do that again. Select the tom, hold the shift key, then press the kick. That selects all of them. You double click on the color tab to change the color of this to something like, say, brown, right? So now they're all brown. And if you want to, you can do the same with the clips. I'm going to do that. So hold shift to click each one of these. Right, and then go to window, color palette, and do this too. All right, so these are the drums, right? So we're only going to use these. Right? The idea is we want to make sure that it's in time. It sounds off time, but you can also see that when you zoom in, this kick is late because the grid is here, but the kick is late. The hi-hat is late, right? It's supposed to be there. Same for this snare. It's early. It's supposed to be on this grid. This kick is late. That snare is early, right? So we want to correct all those things. And the way we're going to do it is using the Elastic Audio. So what you do is, for each of these tracks, you change it to ticks. Right? And then for each of the tracks, you engage the rhythmic Elastic Audio. We're choosing rhythmic because one, we want to be able to move the different transients or like the different hits without changing the pitch, but also because Elastic Audio is a great way to edit drums, right? So there we have changed them all to rhythmic, right? But we want to see the different warp markers. Remember that Elastic Audio uses warp markers to help Pro Tools stretch and compress. Not compress, that's not the right word, but slow down and speed up tracks. It uses warp markers. But in order to see the warp markers, you have to go to waveform and click on warp. Warp. Right? Just change all these to warp. Instead of waveform, you go to warp. Right? So now you can see that there are warp markers at every single transient. Right? So Pro Tools has detected all the transients, and now what you can do is you can manually go in and change them if you want to. Remember, to select a warp marker, you have to double click. If you move just one, it will move the entire clip, which I don't recommend, right? That's going to move the entire thing. We don't want that. What we do want is we want to select the warp marker and the warp marker before and after it. So then when you move the clip, I'll show you again. When you move the clip now, only that one moves, right? So you could either just go in manually and move them, or you do it a more efficient way where you select, say, I'm just going to select like the first these. All right. So you select the tracks that you want to change. In fact, I might even go, let me risk it. You're not supposed to do the whole thing because it's not going to be correct. There's a chance it won't be correct. So I'm going to go with 8 bars. Right there. A transient is basically like a fast kick, snare. A transient is a spike in the sound, basically. The actual definition is many, many frequencies happening in a very, very short amount of time, right? So, and even like when you're singing, like plosives, like k, or consonants rather, k, that's a transient, right? Sharp peaks are called transients. Drums, percussion, those are all transients. They're all just spikes, right? So I'm going to choose the first 8 bars. I'm going to choose all the tracks. you go to event operations, quantize, right? You want to make sure it's on quantize, very important. You want to make sure it's on elastic audio events, very important. And you also want to make sure that it is on 16th notes. All right. So we're going to go ahead and hit apply. But before I do that, I want to zoom in and show you guys what it actually does. So you'll see that all of these will be quantized. See, they all moved to the grid. Everything moved to the grid. So now, sounds a lot better. Cool. And whatever's after that, I haven't even touched yet, right? So fortunately, we got all that right. So now, what do? We do the next batch. So let's do something shorter, like that. Let's do 4 bars, right? Oop, don't want to do all that. This, I want to do from that to that. What's up, Kevin? Is it only highlighted region that becomes... Yes, correct. So that's why I'm highlighting it. And again, it can only work if you have elastic audio on, ticks on, and you have the warp markers viewed. Right? That's the only way it works. As far as I know. I don't think there's any other way to do this. Right? Same thing. Quantize or apply. Boom. Ah, see? It fucked up one. That it sounds good, but this should actually be over here. So you see? Sometimes it messes it up. Oh, here we go. This fucking thing. I wonder if I can get this right. This shit's annoying. Why couldn't I get that right? Although that sounded fine because it was on the grid. Oh, maybe that's what it was supposed to be. Oh, maybe I'm right. Maybe I'm right. But let's see, out of curiosity, if I go back to quantize and I go to, I guess it would be so it would be 16th notes, but it would be triplets, right? And then sure. Hey! Haha! Look at that! Nice! So why couldn't I get it last time? I guess it's on like a finer 32nd notes. No, it's on 64th. That's probably where I fucked up. There you go. So you do that for basically the whole track. It's not really that complicated, right? Or if that's too much, maybe you can do half the track. That shit's a long. We can decide that tomorrow. Maybe you can just do half the track. But anyway, once you're done applying quantization and everything, the first thing you do is you can take it off the elastic audio. So when you click on the elastic, after you've edited everything, you click on the elastic audio selection and you click on none, and it'll say, hey, you made some changes. Do you want to keep the changes? And you say yes. Right? And you do that with all of them. Right? And I'm just going to do it fast because I can. There you go. And it retains everything. Nice. And that's it. So we went ahead and quantized this thing, and whenever you're ready to bounce, remember, in order to bounce, oh, maybe I haven't gone over bouncing, so maybe I'll do that now. Whenever you're ready to export a track, if you just go to bounce, it will select the entire region that Pro Tools has been used. So it'll go all the way to the end, or if I had some automation here, it would go all the way till there. So it's always better to select the region that you want to highlight and bounce. Suppose I wanted to like stop here, right? I would select this whole region, right? Maybe I would even start right there. So it starts right with the drum beat, right? So I'd select the whole region. I'll go to File, go to Bounce to. What's up, James? Go to Bounce to Disk. And this is where you choose the format that you're going to bounce to, right? So very, very important. One, make sure the bounce source is your built-in output, right? Because that's what you're actually hearing. Wave is standard. If you want to add an MP3, you can add an MP3 as well. The most important thing, people always fuck this up. The format cannot be multiple mono. It has to be interleaved. For our purposes of this mod, and for most of the music you'll ever do in your life, if you're in that kind of studio field, it will be interleaved. Unless you're getting into film and all that stuff, you won't use the other one. So just go with interleaved. All right. Bit depth 24 is fine. Sample rate 44.1 is right. You don't have to use any of these. One of the most useful ones is import after bounce, but don't use that for now. Name it, right? Name it something like G Paul Fatality, right? Something sensible, obviously. Fine. Jeez, can't have any fun over here. Call it PT Timing Correction. All right. By default, it will put it in the bounced files folder of the Pro Tools session. Remember, the Pro Tools session folder is this whole entity, right? Everything inside this is your Pro Tools session. Everything. Not just this, the whole thing. So by default, when you bounce, it will be put into this bounced files folder. Last thing, make sure it's offline so that way you don't have to wait for the whole thing to actually bounce. Then you hit bounce. This is fine. It's just asking you what format of MP3 you want. That's fine. 128 kbps is fine. And then when you go to your bounced files, there it is. And I don't know if you guys can hear this, but yeah, you can't hear it. But trust me, it's playing. The one thing though that you have to be very sure of that I actually forgot is you have to mute your click track whenever you're bouncing, because if you do bounce, your click track will be on there as well. So mute the click track before you bounce. And that's basically it. That's basically the assignment. I did like a quarter. Maybe you guys can do like a minute of it. You don't have to do the whole thing if it's too tough. But if you want that practice, do the whole thing. Hopefully that makes sense, right? I can't remember the region that I selected. Oh, quick tip, right? When you are in Pro Tools, you see how I'm moving the cursor between different tracks? If I wanted to select all the tracks, I could go up in this little region over here, right? Click, and it selects the entire session. So that's kind of a cool thing to know. All right, so let's go ahead and use this loop. Hopefully that all makes sense. Oh, what are you guys laughing about? So that is your assignment for tomorrow. Now, what I want to get into is something a little bit more fun, right? So this whole time we've been dealing with the edit window. Let's swap over to the mix window. So I'm just going to choose a loop that I know that I've quantized, right? I'm going to swap over to the mix window, and you do that by going to Window and going to the mix mode, or Command equals, right? The mix window is basically where you can change your mix, right? Faders, panning, plugins, all that stuff. So let's go through it one by one, right? let's just listen to what we've got. Yeah, obviously this is a very dry drum kit because I've muted all the room microphones, but oh well. We'll do with what we have. Let's take the example of the hi-hat because that's the most annoying one, right? So just solo the hi-hat. This fader changes the level. Right? This knob over here changes the panning from left to right. Right? Solo, obviously you know what that is. Mute, you know what that is. Remember, whenever you solo a track, you see how it mutes everything else? So be careful. Very important. I want to create the Pro Tools folder. I don't understand the question. Or if it's a statement, cool. So let's go ahead. The first thing I would do if I was like trying to make this sound better is I would just mess around with some levels, right? And panning. Yeah, see, I would pan those. Dome, dome. Yay! Right? So that's the idea. Just playing around with levels. That's all I did, right? Forgot that this string should be on loop. Now, we can start getting a little bit more crazy with this thing. I'm not going to get too crazy because, you know, I don't want to scare anybody. Let's start talking about plugins, right? So a plugin is basically a piece of software. That's all it is. And in Pro Tools, plugins apply effects onto your sound so that you can fuck with it. And I've already kind of touched upon this before, but there are different plugins that you can use to manipulate your sound. All right? And the plugins as a whole, yeah, Moses, I didn't understand if that was a question or not. Maybe you can ask me when we go back to Zoom or something. So, in Pro Tools, you deal with two types of plugins, right? There are real-time plugins, and there are plugins that you can apply through a rendered form, which just means it doesn't happen in real time, right? So, for example, you guys see these things called inserts over here, right? An insert is basically a point where you can add some type of effect, whether it's an EQ, compressor, reverb, whatever it is. An insert is where you can insert or add an effect. So for example, if I was to choose the snare drum, right? I could go over to the inserts, click, go to plugins, right? And obviously I have more plugins than, you know, to know what to do with, but for now, let's just go to the EQ section and choose a basic EQ. Let's just choose this one. This is a Pro Tools default one. All right, so everybody, whoever has Pro Tools will have this. EQ3 7-band. So this is an equalizer, right? Remember, we talked about equalizers and that EQs can manipulate frequencies. That's basically the purpose of an EQ. What do I mean by that? You can add low end, high end, whatever. So if you wanted to add more high end to the snare, you would use an EQ. This particular EQ is a parametric EQ. You have graphical EQs and parametric EQs. In order to understand the difference between those, you have to understand the parameters that are involved in an EQ. So there's frequency, right? Because you got to choose your frequency. There's gain, because whatever frequency you choose, you can either add gain to it or reduce the gain. And then there's the bandwidth, or the Q, which is you can either get really specific on the frequency or have like a much broader spectrum that you affect. In a parametric EQ, you can adjust any of those parameters. You can change the frequency, gain, and the Q. In a graphical EQ, you can only change the gain. That's it. The other two are fixed, and you can't touch those. That's why graphical EQs are really good in live situations, because if something starts to feed back, you can just immediately go to that frequency and boom, dip it. Although I will say that like most of the live situations that I've been in, people are using parametric EQs in the digital world now, so take what you will with that. So this parametric EQ is called the EQ3 7 band. And it's called the 7 band because there are 7 bands, right? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know why I moved that one. But then there's 2 more. There's a 1 here and 1 here. So let's go through each of them one by one, or each of these steps one by one. At the very top, you see 2 meters. You have an in and an out. The in is the level of the signal coming into the EQ. So if you imagine the snare coming down this track and it hits the EQ, the level at which it hits the EQ is the in, and the level which it comes out of the EQ is the out, right? So since I haven't done anything to the snare, they should be the same in and out, right? Now I can add more gain to the input, which means it's coming in, but I want to add the gain before the EQ affects it, right? Pre-EQ, as they say. Or I can add just to the output of the EQ, which is after the EQ affects it. So now you'll see that the in fader, or the in level rather, is going to be lower than the out. Right? 6 dB difference. So that's good to know. Because you never want to have either of these clip. If the snare was coming in too hot, I would have to dial the input back. Right? So if you guys want to see the example of that, check out what happens when I do something like this. Oh, not enough, huh? Right? It clips. So I would have to dial the input back. Still no. Whoa, I'm fucking up this. Or I would have to dial this back as well. That's too much. Never do that, by the way. Right? So if it was clipping like that, I would either do the clip gain, or I would adjust the input of my EQ. Right? It's kind of cool. And just so you know, every clip in Pro Tools can be clip gained, which means that if I just cut this clip right now. I just basically made a cut. There's a little fader at the bottom of each clip, and you can turn that up and down. It's kind of cool. But the clip gain is pre-fader, which means that clip gain happens before it hits any of these inserts or this fader. It's pre-fader, right? So, back to the EQ. So I got the in and out knobs, input gain, output gain. You have a phase flip in case you want to flip the phase of the signal. So when you have more than two or more microphones capturing the same source, there's a time difference between the 2 microphones if they're at different distances. And when you add those 2 together and sum them in Pro Tools, it can create what's called a phase difference, or basically you can have a tone that is completely different from the original source. So if I had a snare and I had 2 microphones on it, like an overhead, right? It reaches one microphone before it reaches the other. But when I put that into Pro Tools and I combine it with the actual snare microphone, there's a chance that it'll cause a dip. The time difference will cause a dip in certain frequencies. It can cause an addition in certain frequencies, and it can also cause a lack of transient hit. So that's where phase difference becomes like a big issue, because if you don't have things in phase, you could lose the characteristic and the transient of the, or the attack rather, of the sound. If you want to get into it, it's in physics it's called constructive interference and destructive interference. Constructive interference is that certain frequencies will add together and change the tone, and destructive is certain frequencies cancel and reduce each other, right? So that's phase. Phase is basically time difference. And you can flip it. You can flip it by 180 degrees by hitting that phase button. I think you get more into phase in Mod 3 when you actually do drum tracking. Makes more sense then. Right? You probably don't need it this mod. Actually, you won't need it this mod. So, let's go to the next. This is called a high pass filter because it passes high frequencies. High pass filter. Pass high frequencies. So when I click on the in button, you'll see that a little thing appeared over here. And if I turn up the frequency, it will go to a higher frequency. Remember, this whole line is a spectrum. You can see 20 hertz is down here, 100 hertz is here. This is a spectrum of frequencies. So the higher frequencies are up here, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000. Then the mid frequencies, like 200, 500, 1,000, and then the low frequencies are here, right? So when I engage the high pass filter, and I change the frequency, right? And I can also change the actual depth, or the octaves, the decibels per octave or the slope. It can be more steep, less steep. I like more steep in most cases. So check it out. See how it changes? Now let's do the opposite. Let's do a low pass filter, right? Turn up the steepness. Right? Cool. So high pass and low pass. Next, you have 5 different bands that you can fuck around with. Now, the two on the extreme sides, the extreme left and right, are shelves. So shelves are basically bands that boost frequencies from a certain point till the end of the spectrum. So a low shelf looks like this. It looks like an actual shelf, right? There's not a lot of low frequencies in this snare, so you won't hear it. But if I hit up the high frequencies, the high shelf, right? So those are shelves, right? You can also change them to be what's called bells, like that. Oh, that's not the one. That's the one, right? And this is the most common one. The bell is the most common because you can move it around and you can only affect a certain region if you want to, right? So let's go ahead and choose one of these, right? So this is your normal EQ curve. Now this is where the Q comes into play, right? So you can make it narrower or larger. Check it out. Make sense? So let's go ahead and EQ this. Set everything back to the default. Let's EQ the snare. Alright, that sounds good. Maybe we can boost the low end if we want to. Alright, and if you want to compare before and after, there's a bypass button on every plugin. So when you click bypass, this is the raw sound. And this is after EQ. Before. After. Right? So, again, you have to train your ears if you want to listen to hear tinier differences, but you should be able to hear, at least feel the difference when I went back and forth. As you train your ears more and more, you'll understand what moves to make. Because you only want to make subtle moves. Like I said, subtlety is the key to the game. Right? So let's do that with the kick drum. Let's add an EQ. Already. So around 300 we call like the boxy region, and I usually don't like that, so I'll get rid of that for the kick drum. That. Probably get more. No, that's good. Add some top end to get that kind of clicky sound. All right. Maybe add a little bit on the low end. 50, 60 hertz is where the good pump of the kick lives. Can't hear it too well in the headphones. Yeah, it's hard to tell on headphones, but that sounds good. Woo! I lost some gain, so I'll make that up. So before, after, woo. You don't want it to just be louder. You want it to sound more meaty with like attack. That's after, right? Before, after. Turn this down again. Oh yeah. Fuck yeah. Alright. Hi-hat. Let's do the same. Fuck it. Probably don't need to do too much. Hi-hat, I'll probably add a high pass. Yes. All right, I'm going to leave the toms for now just so that you guys get an idea, right? So, does that make sense? Yeah, I'm not going to do the toms because I feel like I'm doing everything here. That might be too boring for you guys. So, what I'll do now is, let's move on to... I want to show you something else because now we're just using EQ. I want to show you the power of an EQ. So, like... Here's the thing. We kind of talked about, how do we say this? We kind of talked about the idea of buses, maybe. We might have talked about it. If not, I'm going to show you right now. But buses are basically ways to connect two different places where audio can go. So audio can go from one bus to another, right? You don't have to remember this. This might be a little bit of a jump, but I think it's important because you guys will hear the difference as to what you can do, you know, with just EQ. I think a lot of people don't understand that. So I'm going to create what's called an auxiliary track. Again, don't worry. This might be a two-head of you. Don't worry about it. I just want to show you something cool, right? An auxiliary track does not contain any audio clip, right? You can see that it's just a line, but it does allow audio to pass through it, right? So if I send audio to it, it will accept the audio. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose the output of the kick, and I'm going to, instead of the built-in output, I'm going to choose bus 1 and 2, right? And I'm going to choose bus 1 and 2 for all of these. Bus 1 and 2, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to do it for all of them, right? Bus 1 and 2. And then I'm going to set the input of this to bus 1 and 2. Now watch what happens. So all the audio from these tracks is coming here. So they're actually all coming to that bus and combining onto the drum bus. So if I put an EQ on this bus, it will affect the whole drum kit, right? Check it out. Right? Nash selling the skills, selling the services. Can get your music video and write up on the Source and Elevator platform. Yeah. So any artists out there, check that shit out. But you heard, right? The EQ on the bus, because I sent all the tracks to the bus, it's affecting the entire thing. You don't have to know how to do this. I'm just jumping a little ahead because I want to get into the fun stuff, and this is kind of where the fun stuff starts, right? So check this out. I'm going to EQ the whole drums now. See that? Yes, you can use Waves. Like, for example, this is a Waves plugin. Right? So check it out. I've only used EQ, but let's see what the difference is. Actually, let me make sure I've done this correctly. I'll do that instead. Just make up that gain. All right, so check this out. I'm gonna go to the drums before. All I've done is I've leveled them and I've added some EQs. I've panned some shit, right? So let's listen to the drums before. These are the old drums. Right? And the new drums. Woo! Before. After. To me, that's a fucking difference. It feels different to me. I love that shit. Ugh. Before. After. Oh, fuck yeah. Before. So that's, I just wanted to show you that because that's the power of EQ. It's fucking huge. It sounds tighter, cleaner, better low end, less shit in the middle. Fucking love that shit, man. So that's the power of an EQ. All I've done is leveling, panning, EQing. That's it. I haven't done anything else, right? Liddy, right? It's pretty wild. I love that shit. So, that's the power of an EQ. Next, let's get into compression, right? So remember, I have each track, like the kick, snare, hi-hat, I got an EQ on them, but then I'm sending all these tracks to a drum bus, right? The drum bus is here. And I do that by outputting. You have to output all these to bus 1 and 2, and then you have to input the stereo auxiliary on bus 1 and 2. All right, input, output. People get confused by that sometimes, but yeah, it's important to know. All right, so let's go ahead into compression. Compressor is the shit that really fucks with people because not only is it hard to understand, it's hard to hear, it's also hard to master, like really get down. People start to overcompress, don't compress enough. It's crazy. So a compressor is basically a device that allows you to control dynamics, right? So what's a good example, right? If I had a voice, right, that was going too crazy, like it was getting soft, 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 loud, soft, 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 loud, right? That's where a compressor would come into play, right? But another cool thing about a compressor is that you can use it to make things hit harder. You can have more attack, right? Because you can control the dynamics in the opposite way too, not just by reducing dynamics, but you can increase the gap between dynamics too. I'm going to go over all these plugin shits again, right? I just want to get you guys excited about some of the more fun shit we can do in Pro Tools. I'm going to go over all these plugin shits again. Don't worry about that, right? And you don't have to do this tomorrow. Do not have to. I just want to show you some fun shit. So let's go ahead and open up the standard Pro Tools compressor. It's under the dynamics section. And it is called the Pro Tools one. What's the Pro Tools one called? This one. This is the name of the compressor. Dyne 3 compressor limiter. Boom. Right? Shit already looks confusing. But let's take it a step at a time. So you see you got some in and out meters, right? That's the signal coming in to the compressor and going out of the compressor. And then next to it you have an additional meter, which is called the gain reduction meter. So remember, a compressor is basically a device which says whenever a signal gets too loud, I'm going to push you down so that you're not that loud, right? So like I said, if I had a vocal and it was super, super soft and then he was like, hey, right? The compressor would catch that and push it down. So it would be a lot more evened out. This is the beauty of a compressor, that you can even out something if the volumes are all over the place. The other cool side of it is that you can use it to make your snare hit harder, right? So we got the in, out, gain reduction. Then we have to figure out what is the basis on which a compressor works. So there's a couple of parameters. The first is called the threshold over here. It's also this little triangle. Because when you have a signal coming into a compressor, you have to tell the compressor, well, when, like how loud should the signal be for me to come in and compress, right? So if the signal is over here and then it gets really loud, at what point do you want the compressor to be like, whoa, slow down? That's where you have a threshold. The threshold is a dB level after which the compressor kicks in. So once your signal passes the threshold, that's when your compressor will kick in. All right? Now, how fast does it kick in? That's what the attack is. How fast does it let go? That's the release. And then how much, after it crosses the threshold, how much does the signal reduce by? That is determined by what's called the ratio. So right here, we've set the ratio to 3:1. Maybe you can do 4:1, which is more standard. Which means for every, like if your signal's coming in and it gets really loud, for every 4 dB above the threshold, the compressor will reduce it to 1 dB above the threshold. All right, 4 to 1. Right? So if you're at 4:1 and it goes 4 dB above, it'll come down to 1 dB above. If you have it 4:1 and your signal goes 8 dB above, then it's going to come down to 2 dB, right? 4:1 is the same as 8:2. All right? So that's basically how a compressor works. Threshold, attack, release, ratio, right? And the last thing to kind of consider is that because you're compressing and reducing the level of things, you have to make up that gain because you're actually reducing the level. So you have a knob called gain. It's usually called makeup gain. That's because like you're reducing level, you're compressing, so you want to make up that. So let's go ahead and use this snare, right? So if I set the attack really fast, it's gonna kill the transients. Check this out. Why are we not hearing shit? Because I'm an idiot. You see that? So I got 4-to-1 ratio. You see how much gain reduction I have? It's like 12 dB of gain reduction. I'm reducing the signal by 12 dB. And because my attack is really fast, you're losing the snap of the snare, right? It's crushing it. When that snap comes in, the compressor's like, whoa, slow down, motherfucker. It sounds more round now, right? Before, after, right? You're kind of losing that hit. 40Q in the compressor is more common. 4-to-1, yes. 4-to-1 is common, but so there's no hard and fast rules with audio engineering, period, right? Some things are hard and fast, like condensers need phantom power, but when it comes to EQ, compression, mixing, all that stuff, use your ears, right? There's some guidelines, like 4-to-1, 60 hertz, this and that. Use them as guidelines, but don't stick to them. But yes, 4-to-1 is a common one. So I said the attack is too fast. It's catching it too fast. As soon as the transient hits that threshold, it's like, whoa, stay down. So it's really flattening out the snare, which I don't like. I want the attack to go through because I want that attack, but I want everything after the attack to be reduced. So if you want to make things hit harder, you set your attack to around 25 to 30 milliseconds. That way the transient goes through, and what you have left is the attack. Make that up. Probably go harder. You can't hear that difference, but it's there. Compressors are the hardest things to hear. You heard it when I slammed it, right? When I put the attack back to like really fast and I slammed the compressor, you hear that difference. Right? That's before. Remember, if the signal doesn't cross the threshold, it's not going to do anything. Only when it crosses. Right? But I don't want to do that. I want to have a good attack, so I'm going to set the attack kind of late. Again, if you want more punch from like a kick snare, 25 milliseconds, 30 milliseconds, that's a good amount of time. But otherwise, it depends. So the knee is a little bit more simple to explain. So the best way I can show you is actually with the Pro Tools plugin, right? The knee determines how smoothly the compression actually occurs. So check this out. As I increase the knee, watch this angle over here. This angle. Check this out. You see how it smoothens out? So the compression actually happens in a more smoother fashion. That's the best way I can explain what knee is. Most compressors don't even have a knee setting. It's a very rare thing that you mess around with, but I kind of tend to like it, especially for vocals. Sometimes it's cool to have a much smoother knee so that it's not so sharp, if that makes sense. But for snare, I do want it to be sharp. That makes sense? Let's see. Let's do the kick. Now for the kick, what you can do is you can copy this plugin over. If you want to, hold Option, click, drag. Pretty good, but I just want to... right? And let's go ahead and put a compressor on the actual drum bus, right? Where everything goes. Everything's going to the drum bus. Let's put a compressor on there too. Plug it, right? And let's, again, we want to get the attack out, so maybe around 30. So since I have about 3 dB of gain reduction, or 1 to 2 dB, I'll do that. Probably make up that snare. Alright. What are you doing to the left? LNR? Oh, so the compressor, since this is on a stereo track, remember I made a stereo aux, which means there's a left and a right side. So whatever I'm doing to the left is doing to the right as well. That's all. Remember, these are mono signals. These are mono tracks. It's only one channel. This drum bus is a stereo, left and right, but the threshold is going to affect both the left and right at the same time. Make sense? Yeah, it's doing L and R. Alright, so look, all I've done is levels, panning, right? Did the levels on the faders, did the panning. I outputted all of these, rather, to bus 1 and 2. Then I input bus 1 and 2 here. So I've sent everything to a drum bus. I've outputted all the tracks to a drum bus. I've added some EQ and compression, and that's it. That's all I've done. And that's actually, funnily enough, that's the basis of most records. EQ, level, pan, compression, and then reverb delay. That's it. These are basically half the tools you need to mix a record. So let's listen to before. And listen to after. Oh! Listen to that fucking kick. Before. After. Listen to. I bet you I could get the snare a little tighter. There you go. Oh, there it is. Before. Okay, so it is louder, so maybe that's a little distracting. So let me turn it down to that. I mean, to me it's obvious. It's still a little louder, but come on, bro. That shit's fucking... Clearly. It's not peaking. Okay, that's a fucking great question. First he's like, it's not peaking. Isn't that like the Chinese dude? The governor or mayor or king or whatever? That's a fucking great question, James. Not a question, but that's a great statement and a great observation. It's louder, but it's not peaking. Check it out. I'm nowhere near peaking. And all I did was change EQ compression. I didn't turn up the faders. I didn't do anything. So this is a very important thing. What we think of as loud or high volume, it's actually a combination of different psychoacoustic effects. Like mix engineers and mastering engineers, they trick our brains essentially to think something's louder than it actually is. It's fucking brilliant. This is where the whole theory side starts to come into play, into how it understands, or how you understand this shit. Humans, we are sensitive to certain frequencies. Certain frequencies we're more sensitive to, certain frequencies are less sensitive to, right? So if you're a mix engineer and you start to touch on those more sensitive frequencies more, to us, it's like, oh shit, that's louder. That's one thing. Another thing, as human beings, when we hear things that have less dynamic range, it's louder to us. So what is dynamic range? So the difference between the softest signal and the loudest signal. That difference is dynamic range. When you have less and less dynamic range, humans go like, oh shit, that's louder. And what controls dynamic range? Fucking compression. And I just reduced some dynamic range. So when you reduce dynamic range, it feels louder. Boom! Come on, tell me you didn't learn something from that. So it's not just about janking up some levels. Engineers are playing with your psychoacoustic mind to make you feel like certain things are happening. This is like the real fucking gem right here, is that you're playing with people's perception. When something is louder, it might not be that you just cranked up a fader or turned something up. You might be messing around like with an EQ, or you might be compressing it so that it's less dynamic, right? That's a fucking key part of engineering. Engineers know that, whether subconsciously or not. They're messing with people's heads. When something sounds like super far away, bro, all they're doing is adding reverb, right? And putting it far back. Reverb is supposed to create space. It's all fucking mind tricks. It's the greatest thing in the world. And yeah, hopefully you guys will get to do it for a living. It's just the best. So let's see if there's one more thing I can show you. Last thing I'll do is maybe I'll add some reverb, right? Because we're kind of running out of time. Reverb is not done on these inserts on the tracks. Again, I'll go over all this again. Don't worry about it. I love fucking mixing. I just want to show you some fucking cool shit because we've been doing a lot of editing, a lot of fucking... let's just get into some fun shit, right? So you don't usually put reverbs on the tracks, right? You don't put it on the kick, snare, vocals. You don't ever do that, right? The way you add reverb is, or the most traditional standard way to do it, is you create an auxiliary track. Remember, auxiliary tracks will let you pass audio through them. I'm going to call this auxiliary track drum verb. And I create a stereo one, very important. Create a stereo aux track, set your input to bus 3 and 4, whatever, it doesn't matter. It can be any bus, it can be 17, 18, doesn't matter. You put a reverb on there. Let's put some lustrous plates on there. You know what? Let's put something else on there. True verb. This was the first EQ I actually bought, believe it or not. Back in the good old days, you heard? And now, reverb on there. Input is 17, 18. I'm going to send a copy of the snare. If you want to send a copy of the signal, like the snare is coming down this track, right? But I want to send a copy of the snare to the reverb, that reverb aux. And I do that using the sends. I click on the sends, and you see how it's not giving me plugin options, it's giving me path options. And I'm going to choose bus 17, 18, which is what it is. And then a fader pops up. Then I hit play, and when I turn this fader up, it's going to send more of the copy of the snare to the reverb. Check it out. Easy. How long did that... well, I was explaining the whole time, so I don't know how long it took. But these are the drums before. And these are the drums after. Kind of cool, right? It's pretty cool. And you know what? These are just drums. Let's see if we can do it for that fucking song. I'll be quick. I don't want to keep you guys out too late. Keep you guys out too late, like you got shit to do after this. Fuck you. Where the fuck is this shit? it's not tick bass tracks. Is it just fine? I keep, yeah, there it is. Just fine. Fine, save. I'll do this really quick. I'll just show you how simple it is. I'll just use the same techniques. Well, let me actually start from the top. Actually, that's better because I don't want to start halfway in, or else you guys aren't gonna understand what the fuck I'm doing. What is this? This is the session you guys worked on, right? This guy?
I can't give you what you need, but I can give you what you want right now.
Right? That's what you're working on. All right. So I'm just going to use EQ, compression, buses, and reverb. That's it, right? You don't have to follow along, or if I go too fast, don't worry about it. I just want to show you that you guys are going to, like, you're about to learn these tools. Again, I'm going to go over all this shit again. And this is the power of Pro Tools, basically. All right? Let's go ahead and make this instrumental sound a little better. Woo! Yeah, that shit is annoying. Cool. That's EQ. Let's add some compression, right? Let's add something. You know what? I kind of like this guy. You don't have these plugins, so don't worry about that. I'll tell you all. These are all waves and slates. I might have some other shit. I don't know. This is just like my kind of shitty workstation, so it doesn't have all my plugins. Ooh, that might be too much. Gonna put a limiter on there because I don't want it to clip. Don't worry if you're not following along. I'm just showing you how you can make these tools work.
That's fine.
Alright, so let's get to these vocals, right?
Like a rubber band, she already got a master plan.
You can actually hear
Find out what's in store.
that. Come on.
Black leather sticking to your skin,
I don't like that.
red lips dripping from your grin. Looks like I gotta learn a little more. Love it temporarily, in love, trying to get you some. Say what you won't do for me, then force me not to run. But I can't give you what you need, but I can give you what you want right now. Never.
So also you can hear, like, the guy is singing, but you can hear the kick drum in the other room. I think like the guy in the studio is playing it, so I gotta get rid of that first. So I'll do that with a high pass filter.
Like a rubber band, she already got a master plan.
There you go.
Waiting
Gone.
for me to find out what's in
If I
store.
bypass this, you can hear the kick drum in the other room.
Black leather sticking to your skin, red lips dripping from your grin. Looks like I gotta.
And then when I
learn
put it
a
in,
little more.
clean.
Love it temporarily.
Love it.
In love, trying to get you some. Say what you won't do for me, then force me not to run. But I can't give you what you need, but I can give you what you want.
Let's add some compression, because this guy definitely needs some compression. You can hear his voice all over the place. Set it to like 5:1.
Like a rubber band, she already got a master plan. Waiting for me to find out what's in store. Black leather sticking to your skin, red lips dripping from your grin.
All right, and let's add some reverb. Remember, to add reverb, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a stereo auxiliary. I'm going to call it Vox Verb. Set the input to bus whatever, 2930. Going to set the reverb on the insert. This is where I want to use lustrous plates. All right. Let's use a silver plate. Right there. And then the input of this is 2930, so I want to send a copy of the vocals. It's 2930. Fader comes up.
Like a rubber band, she already got a master plan, waiting for me to find out what's in store.
Probably more decay.
Black leather sticking to your skin, red lips dripping from your grin. Looks like I gotta learn a little more. Love it temporarily, in love, trying to get you some. Say what you won't do for me, then force me not.
All right. Now here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna make a delay one, Vox delay, right? Same deal. Stereo auxiliary. Choose the input. Choose your delay. Let's go with this guy. 3132. Same deal.
Like a rubber band, she already got a master plan.
What's the tempo of this fucking thing? 170.
Stretched out like a rubber band, she already got a master plan, waiting for me to find out what's in store. Black leather sticking to your skin, red lips dripping from your grin.
And the only thing I'll do now is create a vocal bus. So anything vocal related is gonna go to this auxiliary. Same idea. Set the input to maybe 33, 34. But I'm gonna, instead of sending, I wanna output everything to 33, 34. Again, don't get intimidated. I'm gonna teach you all this shit. I just wanna be able to show you some cool shit right now.
Stretched out like a rubber band, she already got a master plan, waiting for me to find out what's in store. My mind, so I guess the thought of you's just fine.
Cool, and that's it. How long did that take? 5 minutes? How long? 7 minutes? So I created a vocal bus because I wanted my vocals, my reverb, and my delay all to sum together into one bus. So now, if I EQ this, it'll EQ everything that's related to the vocals. The vocal, reverb, and delay.
My mind, so I guess the thought of you's just fine.
Too thin.
Just fine.
Right? So before,
well, I say too much of what's on my mind. My mind.
that sounds like a fucking...
So I guess the thought of you
Before?
just fine. Just fine. Go ahead now, do your thing, baby. So hard to be discreet, but when you say you got me.
Cool, right? Dude, how long did that take? 10 minutes? And you know what? You think it's not loud enough? Fuck you. What's this shit? I'm gonna create a master fader. Whenever you're working on anything, always create a master fader. Everything will go to the master fader. So let's fucking make this shit louder. And what do? You reduce the dynamics, like I taught you. Let's fucking do that shit. And I'm also gonna put a limiter so that it doesn't, if it does go above to 0 dB and starts to clip, the limiter will catch it and prevent it from clipping. This is just a limiter that I use every now and then. Every now and then.
My mind, so I guess the thought of you's just fine.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Just fine. Oh, Well, I say too much of what's on my mind. My mind,
There.
so
Before,
well, I guess the thought of you's just fine.
after.
Just fine. Go ahead now, do your thing, baby. So hard to be discreet. But when you say you got me, oh, I start to go and get cold feet. Now I might think something's unsaid, but I ain't leaving nothing.
There you go. That's it. So, you guys, that's it. The tools are right there. And submaster, isn't there a master and submaster technique? You're not learning mastering this mod, and I only showed you that because remember, you can make things sound louder without it actually clipping, right?
My mind,
It's not clipping.
so I guess the thought of you's just fine.
It's louder. It's not clipping. It's cleaner. It's tighter. Took 10 minutes, right? And that's just a rough mix. A rough mix will take no longer than 10 minutes. Also, you have to understand we're only dealing with 2 tracks. It's like an instrumental and a vocal. That shit's easy, right? All right, so let's go ahead and take it back to Zoom. Hope you guys enjoyed that shit.